My girlfriend ran away on our wedding night with her ex-boyfriend. 2 years later, she came back looking for me when she found out I'm going to marry another woman. Before we go on, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us which city you're tuning in from. I married Marcella when we were both in our 20s. We had been together for several years before the wedding. Our relationship hadn't been perfect as none are, but I was convinced that we loved each other and that we were building a life together. The wedding was something we had planned for months. We weren't a couple with great luxuries, nor did we have a fortune to spend. Still, our families helped, and we managed to organize a quite beautiful celebration. The place was decorated simply but elegantly. There were tables for our family and friends, music, food, and a small dance floor. I remember that during the ceremony, I was so nervous that I could barely concentrate on what the priest was saying. When I saw Marcella approaching, I felt all those nerves disappear. She was smiling. Me too. At that moment, I thought I was seeing the woman with whom I would spend the rest of my life. The ceremony went off without any problems. Then came the photographs, the greetings, the food, and the party. For several hours, everything was exactly as I had imagined. We danced with our parents, talked to relatives who had traveled from other cities, and took photographs with practically all the guests. However, there was something I began to notice as the night went on. Marcella was different. I couldn't say she seemed sad. She wasn't crying either, nor had there been an argument between us. She just seemed distracted. Several times I saw her looking at her phone. When I got closer, she would lock the screen and put the device away. At first, I didn't give it much importance. I thought maybe she was receiving messages from family or friends who couldn't attend. On one occasion, I asked her if everything was okay. She said yes and gave me a kiss. I'm just tired, I accepted the answer. It was our wedding. I didn't want to turn something small into a problem during a night that was supposed to be special. I also remember that at one point she disappeared for several minutes. Then she came back and acted normally. I continued with the celebration. As the hours passed, the guests began to leave. Some came up to say goodbye and congratulate us one last time. My parents were happy. Her parents also seemed excited. When there were finally very few people left, I started to think about what would come next. Our first night as a married couple. The next day, moving into the house we had prepared, starting our life together. I didn't know that all of that was about to disappear in a matter of minutes. The party ended around midnight. The hall staff began to clear the tables while we said goodbye to the last guests. Marcella came up to me and said, "I'm going to the bathroom for a moment. I'll be right back." I told her it was fine. I saw her walk towards the inside of the hall. I stayed near the entrance talking to one of my relatives. A few minutes passed, then a few more. I wasn't too worried. I thought maybe she was talking to a friend or helping with something. Then I heard a car. At first I didn't pay attention. The parking lot was right in front of the hall, and vehicles had been coming and going all night. But that car didn't slow down. I heard the engine accelerate, and then the sound of the tires on the pavement. I turned almost instinctively. The car left the parking lot at a considerable speed, and then I recognized her. Marcella was in the passenger seat. I stood completely still. I didn't understand what I was seeing. The car passed in front of me, and I could clearly see the person driving. It was her ex-boyfriend. I knew him. Marcella had told me about him before we started our relationship. I knew they had had a relationship years ago and had broken up before she and I were together. I never imagined he would reappear in my life in that way, much less during my own wedding. For a few seconds I thought maybe there was an explanation. Maybe there had been an emergency. Maybe someone in her family needed help. Maybe I was misunderstanding the situation. But then I remembered that Marcella had told me she was going to the bathroom. She hadn't gone to the bathroom. She had left the hall to meet him and had left without saying a word to me. I stood there watching the car disappear down the street. I didn't react. One of my relatives asked me what had happened. I couldn't answer immediately. I felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under me. I went into the hall and asked for Marcella. One of her friends told me she thought she was with me. Then I went to the bathroom. It was empty. I went back to the area where we had celebrated the party and began to look for her everywhere. Although deep down I already knew she wasn't there. I called her. She didn't answer. I called her again. Nothing. I sent her several messages. She didn't reply either. One of them simply said, "Marcella, where are you?" Then I wrote, I need you to explain what's going on." There was no response. My relatives began to realize that something was wrong. My parents asked me what had happened. I didn't know how to say it. How are you supposed to explain that your wife has just run away from her own wedding with her ex-boyfriend? Finally, I had to. The news fell like a stone among everyone. Some thought that maybe there had been an argument or that it was some kind of confusion, but I knew what I had seen. Marcella had left voluntarily and had chosen to do so right after we got married. That night, I returned alone to the house we had prepared. There were flowers that were still on some tables, wedding gifts, photographs, a suitcase with some of the things Marcella had prepared for our honeymoon. Everything was there, everything except her. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, still dressed in my wedding suit. I didn't cry immediately. I just stared at the floor. I felt a kind of emptiness I had never experienced. Hours before, I had been surrounded by people celebrating our marriage. Now I was alone in a room that was supposed to be our home. Over the next few days, I tried to locate her. I called her, I wrote to her, I asked some of her friends, I even tried to talk to her family. The strangest thing was that they didn't seem to know where she was either. Her parents were as surprised as I was. At first, I thought maybe Marcella had gone with her ex-boyfriend to a nearby place and would eventually come back to explain things. But the days passed, then weeks passed. Marcella disappeared completely. Her phone was no longer available. Her social media accounts were closed or showed no activity. Over time, I discovered that she had moved out of the city. I didn't know exactly where she was. Her family didn't seem to have clear information about her whereabouts either. For months, I lived trying to understand what had happened. I replayed our relationship in my mind over and over. I wondered if I had missed any signs, if there had been something between them while she was with me, if she had ever really loved me, but I couldn't find any answers. The only thing I had was that image of the car driving away that night, and the feeling that in a matter of seconds the life I thought I had ceased to exist. For a long time, I thought I would never trust anyone again. I even came to think that maybe love just wasn't for me, not because I had stopped loving Marcella overnight, but because I found it impossible to understand how someone could tell you they love you, marry you, and a few hours later abandon everything to go with someone else. 2 years passed, and during those 2 years, I didn't see her again. Not a call, not an explanation, not even an apology, until my life began to change again. I met someone else, and for the first time since that night, I felt again that I could build something with someone. After what happened with Marcella, for a long time I thought I would never have a serious relationship again. It didn't mean I had stopped believing in love forever, but there was a part of me that had gotten stuck that night. Every time I met someone, I ended up comparing the situation to what I had experienced. I'd wonder how long it would take for that person to get tired of me, if I could really trust her, or if one day I would discover I had been wrong again. That's why, for a long time, I preferred to be alone. One of the things that helped me the most during that stage was my dog, Luca. Luca is a husky I adopted a few years before my wedding with Marcella. He had always been a very active dog and needed to go out frequently, so I started taking him to a park that was relatively close to my house. At first, I went just so he could run. Over time, however, those walks became a kind of therapy for me. I'd sit on a bench while Luca walked around, sniffed the trees, or chased a ball. I would just watch people and try to clear my head. It was precisely on one of those days that I met Rosario. I remember perfectly how it happened because it was a rather strange situation. Luca was walking a few meters ahead of me when a woman approached. She had a small chihuahua with her that was walking calmly by her side. The woman looked at Luca for a few seconds and then said to me, "Your dog is sick." I didn't understand what she meant. I looked at her confused. "Excuse me." She pointed to one of Luca's hind legs. "He's licking his left paw a lot. He surely has a wound, and with so much fur, you probably can't see it. Can I check him?" I didn't know who this woman was, and, to be honest, at first it seemed like a rather unexpected question. But her tone wasn't strange or invasive. She seemed genuinely concerned about the dog. I agreed. She crouched down next to Luca and opened her bag. She took out some disposable gloves and asked him to stay still. Luca normally didn't trust strangers too much, but with her he remained calm. The woman began to carefully part his fur. After a few seconds, she found what she was looking for. There was a wound on his paw. It was quite small, but it was irritated and starting to show signs of infection. I hadn't noticed anything at all. She looked up. I told you something was wrong. I felt quite bad for not having noticed. I asked her if she was a veterinarian. She smiled and replied that she was. Her name was Rosario. That was our first conversation. There was nothing romantic. We didn't even exchange numbers that day. She checked Luca. She explained how to clean the wound and recommended taking him to a clinic if it got worse. Then she left with her chihuahua. I thought I probably wouldn't see her again, but the next day I went back to the park and she was there. We greeted each other. Rosario asked about Luca, and I showed her his paw. She told me it seemed to be better. From then on we started to run into each other frequently. At first we just talked while our dogs walked. Then we started sitting together. We discovered that we lived relatively close and that we both had schedules that allowed us to visit the park at almost the same time. We also discovered that we had more in common than either of us would have imagined. Rosario liked simple things. She wasn't a person interested in constant parties, bars, or going out every weekend. She preferred to stay at home, cook, watch a movie, read, or spend time with her family. I had also started to value that kind of tranquility a lot. After everything that had happened with Marcella, I was no longer looking for intense emotions. I was looking for stability. And Rosario seemed to represent exactly that. Over time, we started to go out outside the park. Our first date was at a small restaurant. I remember we talked for hours. I was surprised to discover that I didn't feel the need to pretend anything in front of her. I could talk about my problems, my insecurities, and what had happened in the past without feeling like I was being judged. Rosario didn't try to become the person who would save me from what I had experienced either. She simply listened to me. That meant a lot to me. Our relationship progressed slowly. I never felt like she was trying to fill the space Marcella had left. It was something completely different. Rosario had a very calm and family-oriented personality. She was one of those people who kept in constant contact with her parents, visited her relatives on weekends, and enjoyed being at home. Her name, in fact, had a family history. She told me her name was Rosario after her grandmother, a woman she had loved very much and who had been a very important figure in her childhood. Over time, I met her family. They were all kind to me. Rosario didn't have a complicated relationship history either. As far as I knew, she had only had one boyfriend before me, and that relationship had ended several years ago. There were no secrets or strange situations. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was with someone who really wanted to build a quiet life. And that's what ended up making me fall in love. There wasn't a specific moment when I thought I was in love. It just happened. One day, I realized that when I imagined my future, Rosario was in it. We started traveling together. They weren't extraordinary or luxurious trips, but we really enjoyed getting to know new places, trying different food, and walking without any plans. We also spent a lot of time at home. Sometimes we cooked together. Other nights we just watched movies while the dogs slept near us. I realized I had found something I thought I would never have again: peace. After about a year of relationship, I decided to ask her to marry me. I didn't do it because I wanted to prove something to Marcella, nor because I wanted to erase my past. I did it because I was convinced that Rosario was the right person. I prepared everything in private. I was nervous, much more nervous than I had been when I got married for the first time, but this time the nerves were different. I was afraid something would go wrong, but I also had an excitement I hadn't felt in years. Rosario accepted. She was happy. Me too. We started preparing the wedding. Everything seemed to be progressing perfectly until the messages started to arrive. The first one arrived about a few weeks before the wedding. It was from a number I didn't have registered. It said, "I miss you." I thought it was a mistake. I didn't reply. A few days later, another one arrived. "I still think about you." I found it strange. I asked if it could be an acquaintance playing with me, but I didn't find any explanation. Then another message arrived. "I know you're getting married." That's when I started to worry. I replied asking who it was. For a few minutes, I got no response. Then a message arrived that made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. "It's Marcella." I stared at the screen. I didn't know what to do. 2 years. 2 years had passed since she had disappeared from my life. 2 years since she had left our wedding with her ex-boyfriend. And now she was reappearing just when I was about to marry another woman. The next message arrived almost immediately. "I need to talk to you." Then she wrote, "I know I did something terrible. I made a mistake. I want to resolve things with you." I didn't reply. I sat there looking at the phone. Part of me felt anger. Another part simply couldn't believe it was happening. Marcella continued to write. She told me she knew I was engaged, that she knew I was getting married, and that was precisely why she wanted to talk to me. According to her, there were many things she needed to explain to me. I didn't want to hear any of them. No, not after 2 years I blocked her. I thought that would be the end of it. For a few hours nothing happened, but the next day I received a message from another number. It was her again. Please, don't block me. I blocked that one too. Then she appeared from another account. Then from another. They weren't threatening messages. She wasn't insulting me. She just insisted that she needed to talk to me and that she had made a mistake she had been regretting for 2 years. I didn't want to know what had happened. I had managed to rebuild my life. I had found Rosario. We were preparing our wedding. I wasn't willing to let Marcella come back and destroy all that. That's why I decided not to answer her. However, the more I ignored her messages, the more she insisted, until one of them was different. It said, "Pablo, I don't want to take Rosario from you. I just want you to listen to me once. Then you can decide what you want to do." I read that message several times. I didn't reply, but for the first time since Marcella had reappeared, a question began to cross my mind. What the hell had happened during those 2 years for her to come back precisely now? For several days, I tried to ignore Marcella's messages. I had decided that I didn't want to open that door again. My life had changed, and after everything that had happened, I saw no reason to go back to the past. But finally, I decided to tell Rosario everything. I didn't want to hide anything from her, especially when we were just a few weeks away from our wedding. One night, while we were at home, I explained that Marcella had come back looking for me. I told her that she had sent me messages from different numbers, that she said she regretted what she had done, and that she wanted to talk to me. Rosario listened to me without interrupting. When I finished, I thought she would be upset. However, her reaction was quite different. "Listen to her." I looked at her surprised. "What?" "Listen to her. Let's see what she has to say." I explained that I didn't want to. "I don't owe her anything." "I know," she replied, "but you don't have to get back with her either. If after listening to her you want to close that door, definitely do it. At least you'll know what she wanted to tell you." I thought about it. Deep down, I also had questions. Not because I wanted to get back with Marcella, but because I had spent 2 years wondering what had really happened. Finally, I unblocked her. It didn't take more than a few minutes for her to write to me. She asked to talk on the phone. I accepted. When I heard her voice after so long, I felt something strange. It wasn't love, nor nostalgia. It was like hearing the voice of someone who had been part of a life I no longer recognized as my own. Marcella began by apologizing to me. She told me she knew that what she had done had no justification. She explained that for a long time she had tried to convince herself that she had made the right decision that night, but that as the months passed she began to regret it. I didn't try to justify her or argue. I just listened. At some point she told me something that surprised me. "I don't want to ask you to come back to me." I remained silent. "I know you're with someone, and I know you're getting married. I know I no longer have the right to ask you for anything. I just want to have contact with you again." I asked her what that meant. She replied that she didn't expect us to be a couple again. She just wanted us to be able to talk. She said that after disappearing in that way, she felt she had left a story unfinished. I told her that I had already closed that story. She started to cry. She told me she understood. We finally ended the call. I told Rosario what had happened. She thought for a few seconds. Then she told me something I never imagined she would say. "Invite her to the wedding." I thought she was joking. "Are you sure?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because if she really wants to close that chapter, she can do it there, and because I have nothing to hide." I wasn't completely convinced, but I accepted. I sent Marcella the invitation. I didn't do it personally. I just sent her the details and told her she could attend if she wanted. I didn't expect her to actually show up, but she did. On the wedding day, I was nervous. This time the nerves were different. I wasn't thinking about Marcella, I was thinking about Rosario, the woman who was about to become my wife. Everything was ready. The guests began to arrive. My family was gathered, Rosario's family too. And then, about half an hour before the ceremony began, I saw her. Marcella was standing at the entrance of the venue. For a few seconds no one reacted. Then someone from my family recognized her. The expression on their face changed immediately. It wasn't a welcome. It was surprise. Then anger. One of my aunts approached her. "What are you doing here?" Marcella tried to answer. "I just came to what," she interrupted. Another person recognized her. Then another. Within minutes, several people were around her. Some had been present at my first wedding. They all knew what had happened, and some couldn't contain their anger. "After what you did, you still have the nerve to come. You abandoned Pablo on his wedding day. You didn't just abandon him. You disappeared and left your own family not knowing where you were." Marcella began to cry. She tried to explain that she had made a mistake, but no one wanted to listen. One of her old friends was also there. She looked at her with disappointment. "Do you know how many times your mother asked for you?" Marcella looked down. "I know." "No, you don't. Because you were the one who decided to disappear." Some relatives began to call her different names. They told her she had been a coward, that she had acted like a slut, and that she had no right to show up after 2 years expecting everyone to forget what happened. I was watching everything from a certain distance. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't want her to be humiliated either, but I also didn't feel the need to defend her. She had made her decisions. I had made mine. At a certain point, Marcella saw me. Our eyes met. She began to walk towards me. "Pablo," I didn't reply. She came a few steps closer. "Forgive me." I remained silent. Then something happened that made me uncomfortable. Marcella knelt in front of me. "Please." Some people fell completely silent. "I know I can't change what I did," she said, crying. "I know I destroyed everything, but I'm really sorry." I didn't know what to say. At that moment, Rosario came out of the place where she was getting ready. She had heard what was happening. She approached calmly. Marcella looked up at her. Rosario observed her for a few seconds, then said, "So you're Marcella?" Marcella nodded. "Yes." Rosario didn't seem nervous. She didn't seem scared either. She just looked at her and said, "I think you've understood your place." Marcella began to cry even more. "I just wanted to apologize to him." Rosario let out a small laugh. "You already did," then she added, "Accept your reality, bitch." There was an uncomfortable silence. I looked at Rosario. I knew it had been a harsh response, but I also understood perfectly why she was upset. Marcella slowly got up, wiped her tears, and looked towards the place where the ceremony would be held. For a few seconds she seemed to consider entering. Finally she didn't. She turned around and left. She didn't try to stop the wedding again. She didn't call me again that day. She just left. I stood there watching the door for a few seconds. Then I took a deep breath and looked at Rosario. She took my hand. "Are you okay?" I nodded. "Yes." And this time I really was. The ceremony began a few minutes later. When I saw Rosario walk towards me, everything that had happened with Marcella took a back seat. I thought about that first night of my life that ended in a way I would have never imagined. I thought about the 2 years that followed. I thought about all the times I thought I would never trust anyone again. And then I looked at the woman who was in front of me. Rosario wasn't a replacement for Marcella. She never had been. She was simply the person with whom I had found a different life, a quiet life, a life that didn't need drama to feel intense, a life I had consciously chosen. We got married that day. The ceremony was beautiful. Then there was a celebration with our families and friends. We danced, ate, and took pictures, but there was an important difference from my first wedding. This time, when the party ended, Rosario was still by my side. She didn't disappear. There was no car waiting outside. There were no secrets. There was no person hidden somewhere. There was just us. Several months have passed since then. I never had contact with Marcella again. As far as I know, she went back to the city where she had been living for those 2 years. I don't know if she got back with her ex-boyfriend. I'm not interested in finding out either. For a long time I thought that what Marcella did had destroyed my life. Now I think it simply destroyed a life I thought I wanted. The real life I wanted was somewhere else, and I found it thanks to a wound Luca had hidden under all that fur. If that day Rosario hadn't approached me to tell me my dog was sick, our lives probably would have never crossed. Sometimes I think about that. A small wound on a dog's paw ended up leading me to the person with whom I share my life today. And although that first wedding ended up being one of the worst moments of my life, it also ended up being the beginning of something I would have never imagined. My name is Pablo. Marcella was my first wife. Rosario is my wife. And after everything that happened, I finally understood that losing the person I thought was the one doesn't mean losing the opportunity to be happy. Sometimes it means exactly the opposite.